He was on the laptop almost 24/7 the last few months, and I don't think that was good for him.
The more they're on social media, the more they're actually lonely and less motivated and not knowing how to really communicate and relate. I think it feeds that anxiety and that depression.
This episode of In the Shadows was brought to you by Baby Grace, offering material, emotional, and spiritual support and development for families with young children. Visit babygrace.org. Welcome to In the Shadows, where we shed light on difficult issues right here in our community. I'm Patty Lemons. We learned from the last episode that Jason Spell struggled with anxiety, depression, and anger. And we also learned that he spent a significant amount of time on social media, all of which raised some good questions for me about the increase in mental health issues with our generation who grew up with smartphones, gaming, and computers, and who are now adults. Here to talk with me today about some of these issues is Wendy Ryerson. She's a licensed professional counselor here in Springfield. Thanks for joining me, Wendy.
Thanks for having me.
Now, as far as social media, we seem to be seeing a rise in mental illness. Do you think that can be attributed to people being on the computer more?
What I'm seeing in my practice is a rise in depression and anxiety with young kids, and I do believe it's because of social media. And also with some kids with gaming, also being on the computer with gaming.
And why do you think that is?
I think kids get a false sense of feeling connected. But what I see is that the more they're on social media, the more they're actually lonely and less motivated and not knowing how to really communicate and relate. Social media shows when they're on social media, people usually show their best, and so then kids compare themselves to that, and it really sets up some anxiety because they look at it and all these kids are doing all this, they have all this, and then they look at their life, and I think it feeds that anxiety and that depression.
So what do you suggest?
That parents limit kids being on their phone, even at night. I'll have some kids that they actually sleep with their phone so they don't want to miss anything. So they're getting that blue screen, which affects sleep because it kind of hinders your brain producing melatonin, but it also doesn't allow them to get good sleep. It sets them up to be constantly waking up when their phone beeps because they're getting a message or they're seeing something or something's happening, so they don't get good sleep. Start with just having a weekend free. Once a month, put the phones away for the weekend, or pick a day and put the phones away. We need to start helping our kids monitor that because it's affecting even relating and in the workplace.
And I know a lot of adults do that too, so the same is probably true.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's interesting if you just people watch and you go to a restaurant and watch how people are communicating on their phones rather than face to face, or you walk around or you walk in the schools and people are on their phones, but they're not communicating with each other.
If someone gets a lot of comments or likes on a post, I understand that triggers part of the brain that makes people feel good, and not getting likes can have the opposite result. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I think people confuse getting likes with being popular, and there is no correlation there. And I think people look at getting likes with having relationships, and that's not valid either. So I think they do feel good and they want more, and it does make them kind of feel, oh, I'm special, but in reality inside they still feel isolated because it's not real. It's not a face-to-face connection.
So tell me about that chemical release in your brain when you feel happy. You don't know that.
Well,
that's all right.
Yeah, I think when you feel happy, there's some endorphins that are released, and it does make you feel good. The thing is, to keep that going, you're going to have to be more and more on social media. So when I'm working with kids that are depressed or have anxiety, I focusing on gratitude. And if they don't want to write it down, which a lot of kids don't want to write things down, use your phone. You can use your phone for positive stuff. Use your phone for talking about what's working in your life, talking about gratitude, talking about things that bring you joy, talking about things that you like. That also increases those endorphins in your brain in a positive way. There's no negative side effects. So there's positive ways you can use your phone also.
There's a phenomenon where people seem to say things on social media that they wouldn't say to a person's face, like it's a mask or something, or they're sitting behind a computer screen. Can you explain some of that?
I think part of it is that being on social media and having lots of likes and a lot of friends, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have high self-esteem. And when you don't have self-esteem, you kind of need to make other people feel bad. So when you can say it and put it out on social media, you don't have to deal with that person face to face. So if I can put somebody else down, then maybe it'll make me feel a little better. I look at it as, if you can't say it to their face, don't say it. Or how would you feel if somebody says it to you?
And I think adults are very guilty of that with a lot of the political debates that you see. What would you say to adults?
Stay off Facebook. Well, there's different personalities, and some people feel like they have an opinion and their opinion is right, and so they have to say it. And I say check that a little bit, because sometimes when people put things out on Facebook, they're not necessarily even asking for feedback. It's just their opinion. So I think you have to look at it as a way that somebody is just giving you their opinion. You don't have to defend your side at all. It's just their opinion.
Tell me about cyberbullying. Do you see a lot of that?
I work with kids that have had that. One is, don't go on social media. If you're afraid of what somebody's going to say, don't go on. The hard thing about it is that there's not a break. When I was a kid a long time ago, we had telephones, but you got a break at night. You got a piece from it. You didn't get bullying 24/7. Now, if that's going to be happening, if that negative stuff is happening, it's 24/7 if you don't put your phone down. And some people are just, I have to look, but that negativity just weighs on them.
Because growing up, we might pass notes in middle school, and now they go online and they post it on there, and it's on there forever. And they might be attacked by 100 people instead of one person.
Right.
Do you see that snowballing?
I see that if you're this is what kids tell me, if you're in the popular group and you don't have good self-esteem, you're going to do what the popular kids do so you can stay in that group. Now, really encourage kids to stand up for themselves, and if it's not right, you don't have to participate. Stand up. Start saying no. Start protecting those kids and stop that bullying. We have to look at being proactive and teaching kids to feel good about themselves so they can say no to that and stand up to that.
Do you encourage kids to, if they're going to post positive things and not the negative things?
Well, I kind of challenge kids to go, why are they posting stuff? Because I don't think kids think about why they're putting stuff on. They're either following the crowd, or they think they're so isolated and lonely inside that they have to let people know everything that they're doing. Not only kids do this, but adults do it too. And again, there's an assumption that people want to know what you're doing. Not everybody wants to know what you're doing. So I think you have to be careful with that and challenge yourself. Why am I putting this on there? Because if I'm lonely, what else can I do? If I'm needy, what else can I do? So when you take something away, so if you're going to take or limit social media, you got to replace it with something. So let's replace it with something positive. Give them positive things to do. And sometimes go and finding the good things. Again, put gratitude on your Facebook page, or post just everything you're grateful for 21 days and see what happens.
Do you think that people use that as a cry for help sometimes?
I'm not sure. I think sometimes some kids may use it to get some people to pay attention to them, to pull them into the group, to feel sorry for them. It can be a cry for help in some instances.
Do you think there's a sense of community? Are there any benefits to social media?
Oh man, I don't know. I'm having challenges right now with it, because I see so many kids in my practice that have use social media, but it increases their anxiety and increases their depression. So maybe if you have moved and you have friends where you can connect with your friends that way, or if you're going to a college and people are going to a different college, you can connect that way, or adults can connect with people that have moved in a positive way. Yeah.
People paint the best picture of themselves on social media, which can make others feel like something's wrong with their own lives by comparison.
But I think people, when they look at what everybody does, there's this sense where they really take a look at their life and go, then there's something wrong with me. My life is boring, and then it affects the family. It affects the family also then, because then there's that being mad at your parents because so-and-so gets to do this and I can't. So it really does affect everything. I also see it affecting relationships and even, learning how to date, learning how to talk, learning how to communicate. Kids are doing it now all through texting. And they don't even use the phone. They don't talk on the phone anymore. They do everything with texting. So when they come and they talk to me, they would say something like, "Oh, I talked with so-and-so and this is what he told me and we're going out." And I check it out. "Did you talk to him?" "Oh, no, we texted." So people, they've lost that ability to sit and communicate.
And what do you think that does to this generation?
I think it gives a sense of isolation. It gives a sense of not knowing how to connect. With social media, it feels like there's this instant connection, but people aren't feeling it because it's not real. It's all, I'm showing you my best side, or look what I'm doing, or look how great I am. And so we show our best side, but it doesn't help in learning how to really have a connection. And we need that. We need to feel connected.
You mentioned that the relationships, that it's not real. I know a lot of kids have friends from all over the world. Is there a benefit to that, or can that be dangerous?
I think depending on what everybody's motive is, it could be dangerous. But if it's like a pen pal. If it's learning about a different culture, learning about things, it can be great. But it can also be dangerous because we don't really know where that person is, what their motive is, even if it's male or female, how old they are. We don't know that. So that can be dangerous. So I believe parents really need to monitor that.
And that leads into my next question with monitoring it. Kids have accounts out there that their parents don't know anything about. How can parents monitor that? Because if parents figure out a way to monitor it, then the kids figure out a way to block the parents. And so what advice do you have?
I think it's really tricky. And I think it needs to be set up in the beginning when cell phones are given to kids, and that this is a privilege. This isn't a right. This is a privilege. And sometimes start with, you have to earn that privilege and you have to build trust. And when that trust is broken, you got to take that away. You have to do something so kids suffer consequences to understand that this is a privilege. And kids are smart. They know ways to add things that parents don't know. So you've got to stay up on top of it.
What about gaming? Is that the same?
Gaming, yeah, it is the same. Many times when people are gaming, they also are talking to people from either their friends or even from all around the world. So they believe that they're getting that instant connection. They believe that they're solving a challenge because they're playing this game and they're going to solve it. So they get some self-esteem from that. You get adrenaline going because it's usually combat or it's usually action-packed, so they're getting that. But what happens is it becomes, I'm going to say the word addictive, it becomes addictive. So I see kids stopping wanting to do things with their friends. They don't want to go outside. They don't want to go to school. They stop their activities because it interferes with this game. It's the most important thing. And as parents, we need to limit it, and we need to limit it early.
So I think that's not just true for kids. I think it's true for adults. I think we've all gone through times when maybe we get a little too sucked into social media. What advice do you have for the adults?
If you're getting upset with your child for being on social media, you need to check your own social media. You need to check what you're doing. You need to check on how much you're on it and what it's doing for you. Because the same thing, it can cause depression. It can cause depression in adults. It also creates, I'm seeing in my couples that I work with, some jealousy, some wondering who you're talking to, what's going on. And if I'm not feeling really good in my relationship and I'm talking to somebody and they're making me feel good, that can cross the boundary to have some problems in your relationship. So I think you gotta pull back and look at what is it doing for me, and where can I get this same feeling another place where it's healthier.
So in Jason's story, his mom talks about him feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders and spending a lot of time on social media talking to other people about their problems. And she kind of felt like maybe he took those problems on himself. Is that a result of depression, or, taking that on as a symptom of depression, or is that more being on social media too much and not seeing what's real and what's not real?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's also about maybe his personality, because there are some people, they take on the problems of other people and the problems of the world and feel that and think, oh, what can I do? I should do something. And again, since it creates them being a victim, they can't do anything about it, and it just feeds more and more of depression. And a lot of times what happens is that it feels so overwhelming. It's kind of like a magnet. As soon as I start looking at it, that's all I see, that's all I feel, and it's so heavy that it feels like, oh, I can't do anything, oh, I failed.
So what advice do you have for people like that?
I think if they're at that state, it really helps to be talking to somebody so you can get some reality of what's happening and where they really do have power and what they can do with it, instead of that feeling hopeless and helpless. Where can you act? And it may be just baby steps. It may be, I'm going to volunteer. I'm going to do some volunteer work here, or I'm going to go to the Humane Society. It's looking at baby steps. What can you do? Because you're not going to be able to save the world.
A lot of people deal with anger, and how can we help people like that?
I think to understand anger, when you think about anger and you think about yourself being angry, you can't get angry unless you have an expectation of how you want things to be or how you think things should be. And so we need to look at our kids when they're angry. What is their expectation? And when we get angry, what's our expectation? Now, I'm a mom of 3 boys, and I would get angry because I would ask them to do something, and I thought they should do it. And when they don't, I would get angry. So I had an expectation that they should do it when I asked. It's going to set me up to be angry. So look at what your expectation is. Look at what is behind that anger. Because what happens is we don't have control over somebody else. I don't have control over drivers that I might get angry with, and it sets us up being a victim. And that's the danger part when we feel a victim.
So when somebody comes to you and maybe they have some explosive anger issues, what do you tell them?
If somebody comes to me in their anger, I look at 2 things. If they're explosive, in a way, it's a little bit easier to work with because they're going to tell me what's going on. They're going to tell me how they feel. When people are really angry, but they turn it inward, that's harder because that's that real big depression that's inward. And that's kind of dangerous also. Both are dangerous. But it feels like, for me, I have more to work with when they're explosive because we can look at their expectations. We can get them to not feel a victim and empower them.
Since we're talking about anger, can you give me some tips for coping when somebody feels overwhelmed with anger?
I think when you're feeling overwhelmed with anger, it's really easy to displace it and throw it out at other people or situations. And by the time they're doing that, you kind of need an intervention. You kind of need people that you trust that will help you look at it. There's also has to be that person needs to want it. Otherwise, nothing is really going to work if they don't want it. They're going to find an excuse that won't work, or I can't do that, or I didn't have time, or you don't understand. So it kind of depends on that personality and where they're at. So catching it early is really important. Catching it early and so they have tools to do. A lot of times when our kids are young and they act out angry, all we say is don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. We don't tell them what to do instead. We don't. When you're frustrated or you're mad or somebody was mean to you, we just tell them, well, don't hit or don't say that word. We need to be telling our kids what they can do instead.
And what would some of those suggestions be? What could they do instead?
Well, they could go play with somebody else. They could, if they're being hit, they could go talk to a teacher about it. They can practice just being nice to that person. They can count to 10 backwards in their head, or forward, depending on their age. They can distract themselves. They can think about good things. They can go and do a squish ball or pound on a ball or do something sensory that gets that out. And they can and giving them words. I'm angry because he took my toy away from me, or I'm angry because she wrote something bad about me on social media. Being able to verbalize it and then come up with, okay, what can I do about it? And what control you really have over that. Anxiety is when you don't have any control. So if we can bring them back in the moment, that's the only place you have control, is in the moment.
What about tips for anxiety?
Anxiety is tricky, and once you get how anxiety works, there's lots of tools you can use. But anxiety comes when you feel out of control with something, out of control with the unknown. And anxiety also comes where we fear something from the past and we're worried about what's going to happen in the future. We don't have control over either of those. We can't go back in time, and we don't have a crystal ball. So if we can pull ourselves, okay, in this situation, what's the worst thing that can happen? Okay, if that happens, what can I do? All right, if that happens, what can I do? Bring them in the here and now, right here in this moment, and look at solutions. Look at solutions so they can walk through it.
What about depression?
Depression, I think people need to do something physical. I kind of have some basics. They need to do something physically aerobic to get that endorphins kicked in and going, and also a feeling that they've accomplished something. Even if it's put your tennis shoes on and walk around the block, I did it. Put your tennis shoes on and walk around the block 2 times, I did it. Just doing that and accomplishing it, you're also kicking in those endorphins. Or get a jump rope or a hula hoop. Do something where it really kicks in those endorphins. That's the first thing. Second thing is you got to get up out of bed. If you sleep a lot, you got to get up. You got to do something. You got to clean your closet. Do something. And I believe in gratitude. I think that the more you focus on the good things, it lessens that all the things that aren't working, because we get what we think about. And if I've spent the day on social media and all I'm thinking about is I don't have this and I'm not going here and they went to a party and didn't invite me, what's wrong with me? I don't have enough friends. I'm going to become a magnet, and that's all I'm going to see, and that's all I'm going to feel. So what gratitude does is it shifts that focus to look at what's working in your life. So gratitude is my go to gratitude. And kids, they don't want to write it down anymore, then talk it. Use your phone. You can talk it, or there's a gratitude app. There's so many ways to use your phone. There's apps for anxiety and depression and gratitude, and there's apps for teens on there. Use them.
What would you say to parents and peers if they're recognizing some of these things in their loved ones?
With teens, a lot of times teens think that they can't break a confidence and they need to be there and they need to be able to help them. If you have a friend that is saying that they don't want to be here, or they've been cutting, or they're hurting themselves, tell a parent, and they need to get help. You are not equipped to handle that. They need help.
What would the first steps to help be?
Get them to a therapist if they really have the tools, that they have been hurting or have been cutting or have been taking pills. In Springfield, you go to the emergency room. You can call your doctor, go to the emergency room. They'll evaluate them and then be admitted. But that person has to be in a place of safety, and teens aren't equipped to keep that, to have that safety, because it may work for that moment, but they're not getting any tools to how to deal with it. So it'll just keep happening.
So this is the 4th podcast that we've done, and I've had a couple of questions. Do you mind taking a stab at those?
Sure.
Okay, the first question is about kids who post on social media to get attention. How do you know whether they're attention seekers, if that's even a real thing, or if it's something that needs to be taken seriously?
That's a tricky question, because you don't want to be that all-knowing or guessing. So I look at it, are knowing that person outside of social media, do their words and actions match? So if they're talking about depression, if they're talking about that, are they depressed at home? Are they depressed at school? Have they stopped doing things that they love? Are you seeing a difference in them? So I would look at having words and actions match. And sometimes you have to just, not in social media, but face to face, is just ask them. If you're worried about it, if you're thinking about it, ask them.
And what are some of those actions that we should be watching for?
threats of or words that says I shouldn't be here, or I have no friends, or I'm going to get back at them, or nobody would miss me. I think you have to ask those kind of, if you're seeing that stuff, you have to ask that. Or if they're giving their things away, hey, come pick this up. Hey, I don't need this anymore. That's kind of a danger sign also.
And the other question that I had was for people who have lost a loved one to suicide, why is it so important that they seek help, and then where do they start?
I think it's really important that family members seek help because part of that grief cycle is guilt, and if we hold that guilt, it's going to affect not only you, but it's going to affect everybody that you come in contact with. So NAMI is a great resource. There's a family-to-family group that is very strong and knowledgeable, and you'll get so much support and information because they've all been through that. And there are some people who don't like groups. Lost and Found is another program. Sometimes the churches have grief support groups, hospitals have grief support groups, but there are some people who they're private. They're uncomfortable with group settings. Then I would find a counselor or a minister or pastor that you can talk to kind of get the tools of what's grief. How do you what are the things to look for in grief, and what are the things to look for if I'm stuck in grief?
And I've heard from a lot of the families and even some of the professionals that it's so important just to be nice to each other. Can you kind of tell me your perspective on that?
Well, since I'm kind of the queen of gratitude, I think it's not our job to judge people. And if we can let people be, that means I can be the best I can be, and your job is to be the best you can be. And when we're nice, it's just accepting people for who they are, and it just changes energy.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Wendy. I think this information is great, and people are going to be able to take away a lot from it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
In the Shadows is currently looking for sponsors to keep this project going. Visit intheshadowspod.com for more information. In our next episode, we'll hear from Dave Coble, who lost his son to suicide in 2017.
We just all need to bring it up. We need to have a conversation that needs to be brought up. It's in their faces. It's in their social media. It's a part of our culture, and they are thinking about it either in a positive or a negative light, and you don't know until you bring it up and have that conversation and have that conversation and look them in the eye and ask them what their thoughts are on suicide and how it's affected them and how they perceive that and how their friends perceive that. Until you have that conversation, you really don't know at all. And not bringing it up, to me, is much worse than bringing it up.
I encourage you, if you're concerned about your kids, your spouse, or yourself, to talk to someone. Mental wellness is just as important as your physical wellness. So where do you start? Well, that can be as challenging as the uncharted territory you're dealing with. Many employers do have free EAP services, and that's usually available to you and your family members, and you shouldn't hesitate to take advantage of it. You can also check with your insurance company, and they'll have a list of providers for you. Another good start might be your primary care doctor. They get these questions all the time, and they'll probably have some good recommendations. One thing that I've found is really helpful: talk to your friends, just like you would ask advice about finding an OBGYN or a pediatrician. Ask advice about finding a counselor. One therapist told me it's important to not give up when you're looking. If you're not feeling connected with one counselor, just check out someone else. I Googled mental health in Springfield, Missouri, and I saw that Springfield Greene County Health Department is working on a resource page for mental health. And it looks like it was recently updated in August of 2018, so that might be a good place to start as well. I'll provide a link to that on intheshadowspod.com, but you can find it at springfieldmo.gov and then search mental health. I would ask anyone listening to this podcast, send us a comment about who you would recommend. Please visit intheshadowspod.com for more information and to subscribe to this podcast series. You can also subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, or YouTube. Help us educate and change the statistics in our community by sharing this podcast on social media. If you need immediate help, please call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. Or you can text the Crisis Helpline at 741-741. In Springfield, Missouri, you can also send a text to Dr. Mike Ferguson, psychologist, suicidologist, and mental health coach, at 417-501-9622. And on our final note, as we've said before, please remember to be kind to everyone. We don't know what challenges others are facing on any given day, and a smile from you could turn their world around.